Afternoon, guys. How's it going? Good. I must say, I keep visualizing Morgan like a book that says nobody likes a 40-year-old beatboxer. Anyway, that's a different topic. So today I'd like to share with you an idea about what it means to lead with imagination. But in order to do that, I kind of have to take you a little bit backwards, kind of to the beginning of time, or at least to the beginning of humanity. So for 30,000 generations and 1 million years, this was the pinnacle of human invention. It was about yay big. It was a very versatile tool, right? You could use it to cut up the herbs that you gathered in your walk, or you could put it at the edge of a stick and use it to stab a bear. Yeah, it had a lot of uses for 1 million years, right? And in the last 150 years, the amount that human beings have created with their hands and their brains is remarkable. It's actually a little bit hard to understand. So let me give you a bit of a sense. In the 1950s, 60,000 scientific papers were published. In 2010, 1.5 million were published, right? When you and I studied biology at school, biology was kind of a very distant idea. Today we've got neurobiology, engineering, artificial intelligence as a subject, right? So there's this weird development and complexifying of our world. In the next 1 minute, 104 million emails are sent, some of them to your inbox, unfortunately. 48 hours uploaded to YouTube, and 680,000 pieces of content, very useful content, of course, onto Facebook, right? To give you a sense of what this means is that if you were living in the 1600s, right, in your entire lifetime, what you would read equals to one Time magazine, right? And we read that on our way to work, yeah? So our brains were not kind of designed for this level of complexity that we face. So what does this mean for us as a society? It means that the world is more complex than ever before. And it means more of everything. Everything is more connected, more dynamic, more emergent, more adaptable, which causes this reality of emergence. So complex patterns don't settle easily into simple patterns. So a simple pattern might be the Earth and the Moon and the Sun kind of circling around each other. That's predictable. But complexity is a constant source of marvel and surprise. So the problems we face are layered, complex, and multidimensional. And one of my favorite analogies of this goes like this. 6 blind men go to experience an elephant for the first time. And they have an amazing experience, and afterwards they sit down over a good cappuccino, and they have a conversation. And one says, you know, I never knew that an elephant was like a wall. And the second guy says, that's not what an elephant is. An elephant is like a tree trunk. It's thick and it's clumpy. And the third guy says, that's not what an elephant is. An elephant is like a rope with a brush at the end. Right? And they sit and they argue and they argue and they argue about what the elephant is. That's very similar to the world that we face. We are those blind men and women at the elephant, right? And the challenge with that is that there is no one answer. There is no one truth. And there is no one impact, right? So I've shared this idea of the elephant, but I want to kind of pimp the idea a little bit and say, imagine that this elephant is dancing. And then imagine that the elephant is dancing on a shifting landscape, and you're on it. Welcome to your life. Right? So there is this intensity. And what it means is that complex problems that we face today cannot be understood through the mental models prevalent in our culture. Why? because we think through short periods of time, right? Who thought about where they'll be in 50 years' time? Put up your hand. 2. That's pretty impressive. So we tend to think in short periods of time. So for example, we think about what the next 6 months or 2 years or 5 years looks like. But we don't think in terms of 100 years and 2,000 years and 20,000 years, right? So that's how we look at the world. We call that systems blindness. Also, we believe in something called direct causal relationships, right? Think of a domino effect, right? You push it and it goes diddly-diddly, and you can go, you did that, you fix it. But the reality of today is that the problems that we face co-arise from many, many different sources and create an environment that is conducive and emergent as a specific reality. And finally, isolated incidences, right? We still have this mentality that what we do is we can just kind of rearrange stuff. Rearrange the furniture is the way we change things. We kind of take it from here and we move it over there. But more and more we're learning that you can imagine that the thing that you move is attached to 1,000 ropes, right? And as you pull this thing, you change the whole environment. Yeah? So all of this allows us to realize one thing. Our impact far exceeds our knowledge. Yeah? What we create, what we make, what we envision is much larger than us and has repercussions far greater than we can begin to imagine. Okay. So, and we see this in our world today a lot. We see it in ecological collapse. We see it in energy, food, and water shortages. We see it with the war zones that are going on around the world. And I just wanted to give you a simple little example here. Ecological collapse. If the current rate of deforestation continues, it will take less than 100 years to destroy all the rainforests of the earth. Okay? And this is not to go, oh no, I have to start worrying, but to become aware of the impact that we have on our world. Another interesting fact, right? I'm not exactly one to talk, but I'll let you know the idea here. So right now, today, 885 million people on the planet are undernourished. And 2.1 billion are overweight and obese. Right? So we're seeing all this paradox in our world. And it's pretty intriguing. And the other part of this is that we're a little bit numb. We've heard these stats before. And they kind of come in and they hit us once, and then we hear them again, and somehow they kind of frizzle out because I have to get my targets at work, or I have to get the laundry off the line, right? So another piece that I want to share in this puzzle, which is that our biology is starting to look more and more like our technology. Right? We're bioengineering our food. We are 3D printing organs, right? And we are growing hamburgers, right? Hamburgers in the laboratory, right? And on the other side of it, our technology is starting to look more and more organic, more and more sentient in some way, shape, or form. What does this mean? It means that we're trying to give our own image to our technology. Yeah? And we're seeing artificial intelligence. We are seeing deep learning machines. And we're seeing machines that are starting to look strangely more and more like us. Right? So another interesting piece, I want you to think back to that first slide that I showed you about that tiny little tool that was used. Right? It was the sort of the latest thing in innovation at that time. It was like the tablet. Right? And you had the latest one which had a specific curve and a specific, right? And today, the interesting thing is that little tool shaped our brains, shaped the way we perceive the world in general. And the tools that we are creating now, scientists tell us, are starting to design and structure our brains. And through that, we then design new tools. Right? We're making the connection. So more and more, our tools are designing us, right? And what does all of this mean? It means that potentially where we are is that we might write ourselves out of our own story. It's scary and funny, I know. Right? It means that we have to fundamentally challenge and revision the way we see ourselves, the way we see the world, our relationship between ourselves and the world, and based on that awareness, the way we create and design solutions for the future. Okay. So I started my journey into this world of social innovation when I was in my 20s. And I was born in Israel, and I moved to South Africa when I was 9. And when I was 20, I decided to go back to Israel. And I went and I worked with Palestinians and Israeli youth. And our work was about really looking at what does it take to transform the Palestinian and Israeli perceptions of each other. So we would go into Palestine, we would go, if you only can see what Israeli is through the uniform that they wear, come to our meeting. And we would go into Israel and we would say, if the only way that you see a Palestinian is through a suicide bombing uniform, then come to our meeting, right? And what we would do is we would work at shifting that primary image that has gotten stuck on one another. And after about a year, because I was Israeli, I had to leave the country because they wanted me to do the army. And I don't know if I would fare really well in the army, to be honest with you. But actually, what it was about was I didn't want to go do something against my brothers. Yeah. So I left the country. And I came to South Africa. And what I was sitting with was, how do we go about creating change? How do we shift perception? How do we somehow tilt what currently exists? And how do we create innovators and change makers? How do we teach others to do it? Because one human being can't. And my research took me through an exciting journey. And I looked at all sorts of autobiographies, Tesla, one of my favorites, but lots of others. Madiba, Mother Teresa, Leonardo da Vinci. And I started to understand the qualities by which they approach their world. And I had one clear realization, and that was that innovators and change makers take in data from the world and see patterns in a fundamentally different way to the current paradigm that they live in. So they go against everything that exists, right? A perfect example for that is Dear Madiba, which we can all relate to in this country. But for me, when I was looking for the solution, for a solution for the Israeli-Palestinian situation, I turned to Madiba. And one thing I realized is that he was put in a situation that forced him to revision the way he sees himself, the way he sees his world, and the way that he creates solutions. Now, a non-innovator in the same situation might have fallen into the cause and effect. They did this to us, and we'll do this to them. But this man somehow took the data of the time and saw it through completely different eyes and made different patterns out of it. And he walked out of prison saying, your enemies are your friends. They're just as scared as you are. And through that realization, he transformed a nation. He created a paradigm shift. Right, so they take in data and see patterns in a fundamentally different way. And because of that, they are juxtaposed and they challenge the current paradigm of the time, which is hard, I'll have you know, right? And they bring in new ways of seeing into the world. They literally birth possibility and realities, right? I was fascinated by this idea. This is usually done through accessing the least conditioned and processed parts of their being, i.e., we have a conditioned mind, right? And what happens is that we go through this process of conditioning that mind more and more the older we get, right? So this information lives liminally beyond our conscious mind that innovators and change makers access. And they allow what they see to change them. And I want to offer you a different definition for imagination, because there's something about these people that allows them to tap into their deep imagination. And the definition that I'd like to offer you is that imagination is a willingness to open up to a spontaneous and unpredictable source of information or data, and creative approach that is beyond the current paradigm. Right? So it exists, it's much larger. It has so much more faculty and resources than our conditioned way of being. Right? So to wrap up, the idea here is that when you don't have imagination, you see the world through black and white. You see the world through good and fixed, or bad and broken. And what this doesn't allow you to see is the emergent possibilities that exist within imagination. And the thing is that this data of the possibility of the future is implicit. It's unhinged, it's subtle, and it's peripheral. Right, so we are at that edge where we are being asked to tap into this deep implicit and subtle knowledge within us. The world is needing us to bring our imaginations and to put away our conditioned mind more and more than ever before. Right? And this requires us to realize that we are the blind men and women at the elephant. We need to surrender our dominant ways of seeing, being, thinking, and doing. And the real shift comes from seeing how interconnected the world is. And finally, I'd like to invite you to join me to lead with imagination and to let imagination lead. Thank you.